With the record influx of illegal migrants now flooding across the southern border, what we see is that it's going to be ramping up in intensity, and with it, we can see that the reaction from not only the government but the citizenry will be intensifying. One thing that's so incredibly fascinating about this is how many illegal immigrants have gotten into the country under Biden's watch in comparison with that of Obama's first term and Trump's first term. We'll be going into those numbers in just a moment. But here's something that's interesting about this, and with it, I expect things like this to happen much more, and that's quite sad, but nonetheless, it's the reality of the situation. A farmer has recently shot a migrant, and in doing so, he said that he believed he was having fire returned upon him, so he killed one of these migrants, suspected to be a cartel member. With it, apparently the cartel members cleaned up the guns from the scene, and because of that fact, he has now been jailed and with it arrested for murder of an illegal immigrant. I do not actually know if the person killed was a cartel member, if there were other cartel members present. These are from the words of people like Mike Cernovich and others online and other news outlets that are speculating about things like this. No one is specifically certain as to what's going on, but we must be wary and make sure that we're paying attention to all angles of this story. Now let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the border. We'll be starting this off with a tweet from Senator Michael Rulli of Ohio. Joe Biden is on pace to have more border crossings in his first term than Barack Obama and Donald Trump had in 12 years combined. Illegal immigrant encounters. Wow. So this is from the 2024 projection data from Fentasil, and we can see Obama's second term, 5 million. Trump's first term, 4.7 million. And the projection totals for Biden's first term in office is 12 million people. And right now with the 3-year marker, we can see it's at 8,476,000. Record numbers, and with it, this is going to completely destabilize the country, and certainly southern states, because they don't have the resources to take care of this. And if you need an example of this, well, I've made numerous videos talking about things like immigration, but you can go ahead and check out places like Chicago, Portland, Washington, D.C., New York City, and go look at what's going on with their reaction to all of the migrants and claiming they don't have the capacity to house all of these people, nor the resources to sustain them. But they're supposed to be these things called sanctuary cities. But meanwhile, when they're actually met with reality and the rubber meets the road, they end up just being that of NIMBYs. Because every single time they sit there and they claim to care so much about migrants, all that matters to them is that it's not in their backyard. Doesn't matter if other people have to deal with this and they have to foot the bill of making sure that they're dealing with this. It just matters that they can wave the performative flag of acting like they're a good person. And with it, then they can say that they're so noble, and with it, you're the villain of this story because you don't care about illegal immigrants. But then when they get shipped to where these people live, they then freak out and say, well, this is unsustainable. Now, how do you think southern states feel? It's so obvious. And now we move on to Mike Cernovich, and this is what made me aware of the story of the farmer who apparently shot and killed the migrant that is a suspected cartel member. We are not sure if that is the case, but nonetheless, that is the way Mike Cernovich has framed it, so let's go ahead and jump into this tweet. Here we see, armed cartel guys show up at an Arizona rancher's land. He was 75 years old with a sick wife. They shot at him. He returned fire. Cartels cleaned up the scene, removed the guns. Now the media narrative is he killed a migrant. Rancher is facing 23 years in prison. And I don't know if this is the case, but like I've said, we have to look at this from all angles. This would not surprise me in the slightest. It also wouldn't surprise me in the slightest that this man was being used as an excuse by the Justice Department to say, no, you cannot defend yourself and you cannot defend your property, and this is what will happen to you. Just like they used Kyle Rittenhouse as an example, and they tried to drag that poor kid through the mud, and with it, he came out on top. But my goodness, imagine the precedent that would have been set if he would have lost that case. And with it, this is another moment where a precedent will be set if George Allen Kelly is set to be pushed into that of the role of guilty. And with it, I'm not saying he didn't kill this person. He very clearly did. But the claims of him having shots fired upon him and him returning fire in self-defense of not only himself but his property, as well as his sick wife, well, that's purely justified. And if this is true, as Mike Cernovich says, then this is a miscarriage of justice of the highest order. Let's go ahead and get into these articles. On to the Daily Caller. Arizona rancher allegedly kills illegal migrant who repeatedly crossed the border. An Arizona cattle rancher has been charged with murder for allegedly killing a Mexican man who reportedly kept crossing the border illegally, according to reports. Okay, let's break this first sentence down. It says alleged killing of a Mexican man. If you fired the shot and the guy died, I don't really think it's an alleged killing. Like, you killed him. I mean, we can at least address it as it is. So it says he's been charged with murder over shooting the Mexican man who had reportedly kept crossing the border illegally. So, two important things to focus on. Well, three. The guy shot someone. Two, it is a Mexican citizen that is consistently crossing the border. And three, he's doing so illegally. So, he does not have U.S. citizenship in any way, shape, or form. And with that, what does this lead credence to? Mike Cernovich's claims of the fact that he very well could have been a cartel member, because the people that are going back and forth that are naturalized Mexican citizens, many of the times are cartel because they're doing so in service of trafficking people or goods. All right, moving on. George Allen Kelly was arrested and charged with first-degree murder over fatally shooting a man identified as a Mexican citizen on January 30th, according to AZ Central. Kelly is being held on a $1 million bail. The victim, 48-year-old Gabriel Butimia, I don't know how to really pronounce that, lived south of the border and was carrying a Mexican voter registration card, according to the report. The incident unfolded outside of Nogales at Kelly's cattle ranch. Although limited details were provided, one neighbor told KOLD that Kelly had issues with people allegedly trespassing on his property. Officials said it did not appear the two knew each other, according to the Daily Mail. Butimia had previously illegally crossed the border as recently as 2016, according to the Daily Mail, which cited federal courts. Butimia had reportedly been deported, according to this report. On that day of the incident, Border Patrol received a call from someone who identified themselves as Allen, saying there was a group of people running and that the caller was unsure if he was getting shot at as well, according to Nogales International. Authorities responded to the scene after the call but found nothing. They responded again around 6 p.m. following a report of shots fired at the property, according to the report. Authorities then found Butimia dead. Maria Castillo, who lives nearby, told KOLD that she feels safe living in the area and is used to seeing migrants crossing the border. Well, congratulations, Maria, you feel safe. But guess what? You know who's not safe? Many of the women and children who are being trafficked through these scenarios. And this is something that so many people say because they just don't have information about the ongoings of what the people that are, let's say, going through these caravans are suffering, and specifically the women and children. And let's just focus on the women. There is a tree that is just outside of the U.S.-Mexico border, and with it, it's somewhere where cartel members take women just before they take them into the United States. And what do they call this tree? Well, they call it the rape tree. And you know exactly what's happening to all of these poor women, and this is just one of the tolls they must pay to get to the United States, by being subjected to the tyranny of these cartels. But so many people like Maria Castillo are just like, well, I feel just fine. I'm safe living in the area. But are these women safe? Are these children safe? No, they're not. And they shouldn't be subjected to this. And the reason they're subjected to things like this is because people like Joe Biden are addressing things like the end of Title 42 and telling all of these illegal immigrants to just flood into the country and then doing nothing to counter them and not building the border wall. They actually had pieces of the border wall. The Biden administration, they had the entirety of it. And what did they do? They didn't actually use it. They paid to store it. And then it became legally troublesome. So what did they do? They sold it off for pennies on the dollar. Also, they didn't have to build the wall. So they could have done so. They could have defended the border and didn't. And you know who else didn't defend the border? And this is something that really pisses me off, is my governor, Greg Abbott, who has absolutely dropped the ball. Do not get me started on how much I do not like Greg Abbott. He pisses me off so much. Anyways, moving on to Fox News. Arizona rancher George Allen Kelly's murder charge downgraded to second-degree murder and shooting of Mexican migrant. Okay, so the shooting has been downgraded, which means they're accurately assessing this and hopefully analyzing this objectively, and there won't be any emotional plights. Well, you can't really say that you can expect things like this to happen now within the nature of how the courts work. You saw what happened in the trial of public opinion when it came to the nature of Kyle Rittenhouse, and people were perfectly willing to see that kid dragged through the mud and his life ruined. And why? All because of the fact that he was going to be someone who set a standard. And that's not why people supported it. They supported Kyle Rittenhouse going to jail and being persecuted because they thought he was the villain of the story. But what is so incredibly interesting about that is the nature of the precedent that would have been set if Kyle had been found guilty on the standard of simply defending himself. Because all it would have done is lead to something like George Allen Kelly having less of a case. And with it, if they can convict George Allen Kelly, if he's actually innocent of doing so and he defended himself and his family in the process by killing this illegal immigrant, well, if they can convict him, then I promise you the precedent that they wanted to set with Kyle Rittenhouse steps its way 1 inch closer to the fact of them being able to persecute anyone they desire on a whim, just as the Justice Department effectively can already do. All they have to do is cock up some ridiculous scheme, and we've seen this happen consistently. They get rid of politicians they don't like in many ways, shapes, and forms, and with it, we can see that, my goodness, they've been doing it to the political class for so long that you have to realize that soon they will gladly start coming for that of the civilian class. Now let's go ahead and throw it into this clip from Fox News, and then we'll move on.
$1 million bond accused of murder for shooting and killing a migrant on his property. Prosecutors claim he was targeting migrants to kill them, while the defense says he is being framed by violent traffickers.
Debbie Douglas is a Texas rancher who also has had her own ranch broken into by migrants. She joins us now. Debbie, as someone who lives on a ranch near the border, what was your reaction when you saw prosecutors go after George Kelly in the first place, continuing to go after him in light of the fact that he was, quite frankly, defending his family?
I believe that this is all a setup, and they're trying to use Mr. Kelly as an example to put fear into the rest of us that have ranches along the border. They don't want us to defend our property, so they're going to use him to try to put fear into us.
You know, you live 50 miles north of the border. You're in Texas, and I know the laws in Texas and Arizona are much different, but you've had attempted break-ins 3 times from migrants in just the past 18 months or so, to the point where you had to spend 13 grand for security protocols, whether it be security cameras, some type of fencing, and security for your windows. You know, have you thought about what you would do if someone broke into your home like this? I mean, granted, I don't think they've gotten in yet, but what happens if they do? Do you feel protected?
I will tell you this. I will stand my ground. I will fight for what's mine. They're not going to scare me and make me fear that I will not stand up to them. And also, if I'm not mistaken, Arizona is a castle doctrine state, as Texas is, which means we do have the right to defend our property.
Debbie, do you feel this confidence because of the fact of who your governor is and because you are a stand your ground state?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Looking at this from the 30,000-foot view, doesn't this action against Mr. Kelly really send a message from the Biden administration, quite frankly, that the lives of illegal migrants are more important than the lives of the citizens that live in states like Arizona and Texas?
Now on to Reuters. Biden under pressure as U.S.-Mexico border arrests reach record high. And why is that? Oh my goodness, can anyone guess? It's because we have a record number of illegal immigrants influxing into the country. And what do we see? This was written October 20th of 2021. I can only imagine the numbers are far worse now. And here we go on to the AP. A deal on U.S. border policy is closer than it seems. Here's how it's shaping up and what's at stake. And here's what's at stake. It's funding for Israel and Ukraine. The majority of the funding in the bill will be going to give Ukraine and Israel funding to protect their borders. But they don't actually care about protecting yours. They'll gladly send billions of dollars abroad to go protect these bastions of democracy, as the US and the West loves to call them. And what is Ukraine? Run by Volodymyr Zelensky, someone who banned opposition parties and claimed he will not be holding elections. And what is Israel? Israel is run by Benjamin Netanyahu, who reconstructed that of the Israeli constitution so he could circumnavigate his way back into that of a third term in office. But yes, these are just these noble bastions of democracy. Absolutely ridiculous. They don't care about protecting you and making sure you're safe at home and dealing with domestic issues. They only care about the expansion of the world empire and claiming to protect these noble bastions of democracy. And if this is what their ideal of what democracy is, imagine what they want to subject you to here at home. Now we move on to Reuters once more. What Republicans and Democrats want to do on U.S.-Mexico border security. Alrighty, what do we have? Republicans in the U.S. Congress are blocking emergency funding for Ukraine and threatening to force a government shutdown in an effort to tighten security along the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S. Border Patrol arrested about 2 million migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border in the fiscal year of 2023, similar to the record-breaking totals during Biden's first 2 years in office. During Republican Donald Trump's 2017 to 2021 presidency, migrants arrested peaked at 852,000 in fiscal year 2019. Republicans say Biden has encouraged migrants by loosening Trump's era of restrictions. They also oppose Biden's new policies that allow certain migrants to enter legally for humanitarian reasons, saying they circumvent standard immigration channels. What do Republicans want at the border? Mike Johnson, the Republican House Speaker, said Biden needs to reinstate Trump's policies and crack down on border crossings. Johnson has also called on the Democratic-led Senate to approve a bill passed by the House in May that would effectively end access to the asylum at the border. The measure known as HR2 passed the broad Republican support, but with no backing from Democrats. The bill has come to a vote in the Senate where it faces steep Democratic opposition. What do Democrats want? A White House funding request pairs tens of billions of dollars for Ukraine and Israel with nearly $14 billion for U.S. border security. That money would pay 1,300 additional U.S. Border Patrol agents, 1,600 new asylum offices, and 375 new judge teams. The package has been blocked by Republicans in the Senate. House Speaker Mike Johnson's office says the bulk of the money would be used to manage border arrivals instead of discouraging illegal immigration. Now it's time to complain about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, because rather than saying, no, you want to send tens of billions of dollars to Israel and Ukraine, and we have to worry about the funding here at home because people here are suffering. No, he's just as much as any of the hawks in that establishment. He is just like every single one of them. He's perfectly okay with funding Ukraine endlessly. He's perfectly okay with funding Israel endlessly. And with that, what does that mean? It means we traded someone like Kevin McCarthy for someone who is exactly like Kevin McCarthy. Absolutely unbelievable. Now let's go ahead and jump into reading HR2. From Congress.gov, the bill addresses issues regarding immigration and border security, including by imposing limits to asylum eligibility. For example, the bill requires the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, to resume activities to construct a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, provides statutory authorization for Operation Stone Garden, which provides grants to law enforcement agencies for certain border security operations, prohibits DHS from processing the entry of non-U.S. nationals, aliens under federal law arriving between ports of entry, limits asylum eligibility to non-U.S. nationals who arrive in the United States at a port of entry, authorizes the removal of non-U.S. nationals to a country other than the individual's country of nationality or last lawful habitual residence, whereas currently the type of removal may only be to a country that has an agreement with the United States for such removal. Expands the types of crimes that may make the individual ineligible for asylum, such as conviction for driving while intoxicated, causing another person seriously bodily injury or death. Authorizes the DHS to suspend the introduction of certain non-U.S. nationals at an international border if DHS determines the suspension is necessary to achieve operational control of that border. Prohibits states from imposing licensing requirements on immigration detention facilities used to detain minors. Authorizes immigration officers to permit an unaccompanied alien child to withdraw their application for admission into the United States, even if the child is unable to make the independent decision to withdraw the application, imposes additional penalties for overstaying a visa, and requires DHS to create an electronic employment eligibility confirmation system modeled after the E-Verify system and requires all employers to use the system. Now that you understand HR2, this is the nature of what it was intended to solve. Thousands of migrants form lines at the U.S.-Mexico border awaiting the end of Title 42. And well, as I've stated previously, it's going to fall on states, and with it, sadly, it's going to fall in the hands of people like Greg Abbott, who so consistently dropped the ball. And in doing so, hopefully the people of Texas will make sure that he's actually held accountable, and he'll really step up to the plate. Bad euphemism for Greg Abbott, my apologies. Anyways, hopefully he'll really address the nature of what's going on, and his feet can be held to the fire. Fuck! Anyways, we really need to have this be addressed, and with it, this is something that needs to be talked about with the minutia that is required to actually address something as complex as the nature as a mass immigration crisis. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. One thing we actually have to do, and this is something that's so important, is to see southern states simply start arresting and expelling federal agents when they come in to try and set the precedent that we must listen to them, that we must operate under the ethos that they deem necessary, because that was never supposed to be how a constitutional republic worked. We were never supposed to be mandated to exist under the ethos of the federal gun that Washington, D.C. holds the entirety of the country under. Thank you for watching. Stay lovely, stay great. Tell someone you love them. Peace out.